November 14, 1961, 9:47 p.m. A blank note slid across a Harlem table, and the room understood that silence had already chosen who would stand. The note appears. Bumpy Johnson was already seated when the man arrived. That mattered. In Harlem, arriving first was not patience, it was control. The table was small, scarred by years of quiet agreements. Two glasses sat near the center, untouched. Between them lay the paper, clean, empty, a single rectangle of white that did not belong to the room and yet commanded it. No one announced it, no one explained why it was there. Bumpy did not look at the paper. He looked past it, toward the man who had taken too long to sit. The man felt that delay settle on his shoulders like a coat he could not remove. Chairs scraped softly as others adjusted themselves, careful not to draw attention. Harlem nights had taught them what attention cost. The visible danger came early, small and almost polite. The man reached forward, fingers stopping just short of the paper, not grabbing, just testing. The movement was enough. Air shifted. A few breaths held. Bumpy did nothing. That was the correction. The hand withdrew. The paper remained untouched. Its blankness grew heavier now that it had been almost claimed. The man sat back, pretending comfort, pretending this was still a conversation and not a reckoning. Outside, traffic passed. Somewhere down the block, a door slammed. Normal sounds. Inside, those sounds felt distant, as if the room had leaned away from the city. Bumpy folded his hands once slowly. The gesture was ordinary. It felt final. "This isn't a long thing," he said. His voice was even, not quiet for effect, just settled. Words from him never hurried, they arrived already decided. The man nodded too quickly. He watched the paper instead of Bumpy's face. That was another mistake. The paper offered nothing. No clue, no threat, no promise. It simply existed. Everyone at the table understood the unspoken boundary. No one would write on it. No one would suggest writing on it. Whatever decision waited would not need ink. By morning, something would be different. No clock marked it. No one said it aloud. The deadline lived in the way the room refused to relax. Bumpy leaned back slightly, the chair creaking under his weight. The sound was loud in the quiet. He did not apologize for it. "You see," he said, not to the paper but to the man, "some things don't need explaining." The man swallowed. He wanted to speak. He wanted to ask what the paper meant, what was expected, how this ended. He did none of that. He had lived long enough in Harlem to know when questions shortened lives. The blank note stayed where it was, clean as snow that never melted. It was no longer an object. It was presence. It had entered the room early, and it would not leave without taking something with it. No one else spoke. The certainty settled in, heavy and calm. Whatever the man believed this meeting was, it was already over. And the question pressed quietly into the silence, unanswered and unavoidable. If nothing was written, who had already decided what this paper meant? The man shifted in his chair, then stopped himself. Movement felt like admission. He kept his hands folded on his lap, palms damp, eyes fixed on the grain of the table as if the wood might offer instruction. It did not. Bumpy Johnson let the silence stretch until it found its own shape. Silence, when left alone, always chose sides. Someone at the far end cleared his throat. It sounded like a mistake the moment it happened. Bumpy's eyes moved once, slow and level, not sharp enough to cut but heavy enough to settle the room back into place. The man who had made the sound lowered his gaze. Order returned without being named. Bumpy spoke again, not louder, not softer, just present. "You came to read," he said. The line landed clean. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, the kind that did not ask for agreement. The man nodded once, careful now. Too much movement felt dangerous, too little felt dishonest. "There's nothing there," the man said, and immediately knew he had said too much. Bumpy did not correct him. He did not smile. He did not look at the paper. He allowed the sentence to hang in the air until it revealed its own weakness. Nothing there was still something, especially here, especially tonight. Bumpy leaned forward just enough to bring the table back into focus. The paper sat between them, clean and accusing. "Then you won't have trouble," he said. That was the confrontation, controlled, contained, truth surfaced without noise. The man understood then that the note was not meant to be read with eyes. It was meant to be read with memory, with habits, with all the choices that had led him into this chair. He thought of promises made quietly, of names spoken once and never again, of doors he had walked through believing they would stay open. The blank paper reflected all of it back at him, untouched, unimpressed. Bumpy waited. Waiting was his strongest move. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time stopped behaving like time. The internal deadline pressed closer without moving. By morning, the room would remember who sat here and how they sat. That was enough. The man opened his mouth, closed it. He considered asking for a pen. The thought frightened him. Asking would mean admitting there was something to write. Admitting would mean choosing. Bumpy watched the thought pass across the man's face and fade. He did not interrupt. He did not need to. "You already know," Bumpy said. The words were quiet, cold, complete. No one else at the table reacted. They had heard that tone before. It was the sound that ended arguments before they began. The man nodded again, slower this time. Acceptance did not look dramatic, it looked tired. Bumpy stood. The chair moved back. The paper stayed where it was, untouched, unclaimed. He did not take it with him. He did not slide it closer. He left it exactly where it lay, as if daring the room to misunderstand. He placed one hand on the table, steadying himself, or perhaps steadying everyone else. "This'll sort itself out," he said. Then he turned and walked away. No one followed. No one spoke. The paper remained between the glasses, blank and complete, holding the weight of what had already been decided. The certainty settled fully now. The meeting had reached its end without resolution, without violence, without a single word written. And the question lingered in the quiet, soft but unyielding. When the night ends and morning arrives, who will still be allowed to sit at this table? That was the first thing the room understood after Bumpy Johnson left. Chairs shifted again, cautious this time, as if the table might remember who moved too fast. The blank note lay between the glasses like it had grown there, pale against the dark wood, untouched by hands or intent. The man remained seated. Leaving would have felt like a confession. Staying felt like waiting for a verdict that had already been reached. Around him, conversation tried to restart and failed. Words formed and died before reaching the air. A laugh rose from the back of the room and stopped halfway, unfinished. Harlem outside continued as it always did, cars passing, voices drifting up from the street. But inside, the night held its breath. The man studied the paper again. He told himself it was nothing, just paper, just white, but nothing carried weight here, nothing invited memory. He imagined sentences filling the space, apologies, explanations, names. Each imagined word felt wrong the moment it appeared. The emptiness rejected them all. The paper did not ask to be filled, it asked to be understood. The internal deadline pressed quietly now. Morning felt closer, not because of time, but because the room had already decided what it would remember when daylight returned. A man across the table leaned forward slightly, not toward the paper, toward the reader. "You good?" he asked. It sounded like concern. It was not. The reader nodded. The nod came late, too late. He understood then that silence did not fade when ignored. It collected. It gathered every small hesitation, every avoided glance, every choice not made. It became heavier with patience. The paper absorbed it all without changing. Someone reached for a drink, lifted it, set it back down untouched. Habits failed under pressure. That was how Bumpy's influence remained even in absence. He did not need to stay. The shape he left behind did the work for him. The man felt the urge to speak rise again, to explain himself to no one in particular, to say something that would prove he still had control. He resisted. Speaking would make the paper listen. He looked at the chair Bumpy had occupied, empty now. That absence felt deliberate. It carried judgment without comment. "You waiting on something?" another voice asked. The question hovered. It did not demand an answer. The man swallowed. "No," he said. It was the first lie of the night that felt permanent. The blank note remained where it was, collecting silence, collecting truth, collecting what the man refused to say. And the pressure question settled deeper, unspoken but certain. "If nothing changes before morning, what will this room remember about you?" The man realized something then. Silence was not waiting on him. It had already moved past him. He leaned back in his chair, slow enough to look calm, careful enough not to disturb the paper. His eyes traced the edge of the table, the scratches left by years of deals that never made it to daylight. Those marks had once belonged to men who believed their voices mattered more than timing. They were gone. Across the room someone stood and walked away. No farewell, no glance back. Others followed, one at a time, peeling off as if the night itself had given permission. Each departure tightened the space around the table. The reader remained, anchored to the chair by something heavier than fear. Pride, maybe, or the belief that staying meant survival. The paper did not react. He thought about moving it, just a little, turning it sideways, folding it once. Any action that would prove it was still an object and not a sentence. His hands stayed where they were. He knew better now. Touching it would make it his. A man returned from the bar and sat across from him. This one did not pretend concern. His eyes were clear. "You know why he does it like this," the man said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't advice. It was truth offered without comfort. The reader said nothing. "He lets you finish it yourself," the man continued. "That way you can't say you didn't understand." The confrontation stayed controlled. No raised voice, no threat, just exposure. The truth surfaced cleanly and the room did not look away. The reader felt something settle in his chest. Not panic, recognition. He had walked into this night believing he could negotiate silence. He had been wrong. Silence was not a tool. It was a verdict. "You already know what it says," the man added almost gently. That was the second cold line. It landed harder than the first. The paper remained blank. That was its power. It did not accuse. It did not forgive. It reflected. Whatever the reader brought to it was already there. He exhaled slowly. The room watched without watching. No one leaned in. No one waited for drama. This was not a performance. It was a sorting. By morning, the table would still stand. The paper would still exist. But one presence would not return. The decision did not require announcement. The man stood at last. The chair slid back softly. He did not reach for the paper. He did not look at it again. He understood now that the note was never meant to follow him. It would stay. And as he stepped away from the table, the unanswered pressure question settled into the quiet with final weight. When silence finishes collecting, what does it leave behind in your place? The room thinned out as the night went on, not from fear but from understanding. Men left the way they always did when nothing more could be gained by staying. Quietly, without ceremony. The table did not stop them. The paper did not follow them. Only the absence remained. The reader was gone now. His chair stood where he had left it, angled slightly away from the table as if even the furniture knew not to lean back in. No one moved it. No one filled it. The space it marked felt claimed. The blank note stayed where it had always been, between the glasses, between decisions. It had not shifted a fraction. That stillness gave it weight. Objects that survived the night unchanged were never innocent. Someone finally reached for one of the glasses. The ice had melted. Water clung to the sides, beating slowly, patient. The man drank without pleasure and set it back down in the same place. He did not look at the paper while he did it. He didn't need to. Morning pressed closer without announcing itself. No clocks ticked. No watches were checked. The deadline lived in posture now, in the way shoulders settled, in the way voices stayed low even when no one was listening. Bumpy Johnson was not there, and yet everything moved as if he were. That was the lesson Harlem learned early about real authority. It did not require presence. It required memory. A man near the window glanced outside. The streetlights still burned. Night held on, but the room had already crossed into something else. Whatever decision had been made no longer belonged to the dark. "He won't come back," someone said. It was not a guess. It was an acknowledgement. The paper did not react. Another man adjusted his coat, then stopped. Leaving now would mean something different than leaving earlier. Timing mattered. Everyone understood that. They waited not for permission, but for the moment to feel complete. Bumpy's chair remained empty. No one sat there, not out of respect, out of accuracy. Some spaces did not accept substitutes. The blank note had become the quiet center of the table. No one spoke directly about it anymore. Its meaning had finished forming. What remained was consequence. "You notice," a voice said, low, measured, "how he never tells you what to do." A few heads turned. The voice continued, steady. "He lets the room decide what it can live with." No one disagreed. The reader's absence began to settle in, not as loss, as subtraction, like a sound that had been removed from a song, making the rest clearer. The table felt lighter. That frightened a few men more than tension ever had. By morning, the paper would still be blank. That was understood now. Whatever it had asked for, it had already received. The decision did not need recording. A hand hovered over the paper for the first time since the night began. It stopped, pulled back. The man smiled once, thin and humorless. "Some things," he said, "ain't meant to be touched twice." The others nodded. Agreement moved through the room without words. The deadline had passed without ceremony. No bell rang, no door closed. It simply arrived and the room adjusted around it. The paper remained. And the pressure questions settled deeper, quieter now but no less firm. When morning finally shows its face, who will pretend this table never asked anything of them? The night did not end all at once. It thinned. It loosened its grip slowly, like a man who knew he had already lost the argument. The paper remained at the center of the table. No fingerprints, no folds, no mark to prove it had ever been touched. That detail mattered. By morning, people would argue about many things, but not that. The note had stayed clean. That meant something had been settled without negotiation. A man near the door checked the street again. The sky had begun to pale at the edges, not light yet, but no longer fully dark. That in-between color carried its own weight. Harlem looked different when the night started to release it, less forgiving, more honest. He turned back to the table. "It's almost done," he said. No one asked what he meant. They understood. The deadline had never been spoken because it never needed to be. Morning was not a time, it was a condition. The empty chair where the reader had sat now felt permanent, not dramatic, just decided. A chair left empty long enough became part of the room. No one questioned it anymore. Someone reached forward and finally moved one of the glasses, sliding it a few inches away from the paper. The act was careful, respectful, as if the glass had learned where it no longer belonged. The paper stayed where it was, alone now, centered and exposed. A man laughed softly, not humor, recognition. "He always knows when to leave," he said. No name was needed. Bumpy Johnson's absence had sharpened the room instead of softening it. Without him there was nothing left to perform for. No one needed to posture. No one needed to explain. What had happened would stand on its own. Another man spoke, voice low, almost reflective. "You ever notice," he said, "how he never threatens? Heads turned slightly, listening. He just lets you see the edge, then he waits." That was the truth of it. The visible danger had already passed earlier in the night when a hand reached too soon. That small risk had been enough. Everything after had been consequence. The paper had done its work by staying blank. Writing would have been easier. Writing would have given the reader something to argue with. Silence did not offer that mercy. The men began to stand one by one, not all at once. No rush. Each departure felt considered. Each man checked the table before leaving, eyes flicking once to the paper, then away. A shared understanding moved with them out into the early light. No one took the note. Taking it would have meant ownership. Ownership would have meant responsibility. Responsibility belonged elsewhere now. At last, only one man remained. He had been quiet all night, seated far enough back to watch without being counted. He stood, buttoned his coat, and stepped toward the table. For a moment, it looked like he might reach for the paper. He did not. Instead, he straightened it, a small adjustment, aligning its edges with the grain of the wood, restoring order, not altering meaning. He nodded once, satisfied, then turned away. By the time the door closed behind him, the room was empty. The paper sat alone in the quiet, framed by the soft gray light of morning creeping through the windows. No witnesses left, no voices to distort what had happened. That was how Bumpy Johnson preferred it. Events that explained themselves did not need supervision. The internal deadline had passed, not with urgency, with finality. What came next would not be decided here. This table had finished its role. The paper would be found later, still blank, still centered. Someone would pick it up eventually, fold it, put it away, not as evidence, as reminder. And the unanswered pressure question remained, steady and unavoidable, waiting for whoever heard about this night secondhand. When the deadline arrives without clocks, how do you know whether you survived it or were quietly removed by it? Morning did not announce itself. It simply arrived and found the room empty. Light crept through the windows in thin lines, cutting across the table where the paper still lay. Dust floated briefly, then settled. The city outside had already moved on. Harlem always did. Stores opened. Buses ran. Men greeted each other on corners as if nothing unusual had passed through the night. Inside, the table waited. The blank note was still there, exactly where it had been left. Between the glasses, one now pushed aside, the other forgotten. The paper had not curled, had not shifted. It looked untouched by time, as if the night had circled around it without leaving a mark. That detail mattered more than anyone would admit. Later, a man entered the room alone, not one of the loud ones, not one of the curious ones. He moved carefully, like someone stepping into a place where a decision had already finished echoing. He stopped when he saw the paper. He did not reach for it right away. He looked at the empty chair. No name crossed his mind. Names were unnecessary now. Absence spoke clearly enough. Bumpy Johnson was already awake somewhere else in the city. He did not need to hear how the night ended. He knew. He had known the moment he stood up and left the table behind. What followed was not his work. It was the room. The man at the table finally picked up the paper, just once. He felt its weight or lack of it and understood that nothing written could ever replace what had been decided. He folded it carefully once, then again, not hiding it, containing it. This was the consequence. Not blood, not noise, not pursuit. An absence that would not be filled. A habit that would change. A chair that would remain empty longer than expected. The man placed the folded paper back on the table, closer to the edge now, as if preparing it to leave the room without anyone noticing. He did not read it. There was nothing to read. He turned off the light before he left. The room darkened again, but the decision did not. And the certainty held, quiet and complete, pressing one last unanswered question into the space where the night had been. When something is left unwritten long enough, does it become truth? Or does it become a warning that follows you instead? The folded paper did not stay on the table for long. By afternoon, someone slid it into a jacket pocket without ceremony. No glance around, no pause, just a simple motion practiced careful, the kind of movement that did not invite memory. The table was cleared, the glasses were washed, the room returned to its ordinary shape. Only one thing did not return. The chair remained empty. People noticed it in small ways, a pause before sitting, a glance, then a decision to stand instead. No one mentioned it. Mentioning would have given it weight. Silence was lighter. Silence moved on. Bumpy Johnson passed the block that evening without stopping. He did not look toward the window. He did not ask who had been there or who had not. His walk was unhurried, his posture unchanged. Men nodded as he passed. He nodded back. Harlem understood that acknowledgement was not curiosity. What mattered had already been absorbed. Days went by, the absence settled into routine. A name stopped being used, a route stopped being walked, a voice stopped answering when called. No announcement explained it. No rumor survived long enough to harden. The city had learned what to forget. The paper surfaced once more, weeks later, unfolded on a different table in a different room. Still blank, still clean. It stayed that way. Whoever held it understood that writing would only weaken it. Some things lost their power the moment they were defined. The note became a habit instead of an object, a pause before speaking, a decision not to ask, a chair left unfilled even when space allowed. That was its final form. Bumpy never referred to it, he never needed to. His authority did not live in stories, it lived in patterns, in what repeated, in what quietly disappeared. Years later, someone would try to explain that night to a man who had not been there. The explanation would fail, the details would blur, the timing would be wrong. Only one truth would survive intact. Nothing had been written, and yet everything had been decided. That was the lesson the city kept without nomming. Power did not always arrive loud. Sometimes it arrived as restraint and stayed as consequence. The folded paper was eventually lost, thrown away, burned, forgotten. It did not matter. Its work had never depended on survival. What remained was the space it left behind. And the final pressure question lingered, quiet and unresolved, aimed not at the past but at whoever heard the story and thought themselves immune. When judgment comes without ink or witnesses, will you recognize it in time, or will you mistake silence for safety?